Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, August 7th, 1996, President Bill Clinton addressed the nation about the findings by a group of NASA and Stanford scientists. These scientists had looked deep into outer space by looking deep into a rock here on Earth, one rock that was found in Antarctica. The scientists had determined that that rock came from Mars, and moreover, they had determined that they found what they believed to be signs of microbial life. In other words, say it with me, folks, life on Mars. I repeat, life on Mars. It's a pretty big deal, and everyone kind of stopped and paid attention in this moment. But both at the time and in the years since, the context around this finding has gotten a little obscured or spun intentionally, and maybe even Clinton himself in that moment was a little eager to play up the idea that maybe we'd found capital L, capital O, capital M, life on Mars. So let's talk about this announcement, the political and cultural and media moment it created, and maybe we'll dip our toes a little bit into astrogeology. I think that's the field. Astrobiology, I guess, in this case.
Maybe a little astrology.
So you're right. Yeah, maybe astrology, given our backgrounds, maybe. But here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello from a proud Virgo.
Ah, there you go. Great.
Hey there from a Gemini.
Well, our scientific minds are really working on overdrive already. People can tell. We'll talk a little bit about what was in this rock and kind of what the scientists found. I think I've got my head sort of around it. But, we're a political history show. I am fascinated by this story as a political, media, cultural moment. So, Niki, the 90s is your era. I think paint this picture for Clinton, maybe. Why does he decide? He gets some sort of briefing from some guy who I'm assuming is wearing thick glasses saying, we found this thing in some paper. And why does then all of a sudden he says, you know what? Rose Garden announcement, life on Mars. Let's go.
So imagine it is the doldrums of summer, August of 1996. It's an election year. He has been tied up in all of these things. There was the government shutdown. He's getting ready to enter another three-way race. He'd won the presidency the first time only with a plurality around 42% because of Ross Perot. He's facing that same kind of situation again, running against Dole and Perot. And here he has this moment where he can come out and instead of hardball politics, instead of partisanship, he gets to come out and say, we might have found life on Mars. And that's pretty exciting. Exciting not just in the sense of the politics of the time, right? That you can come out and you can be presidential, right? A sort of Rose Garden moment in the middle of a presidential campaign. But we can get into this more, but it's after the Cold War. Americans are kind of in the doldrums, too, trying to find a sense of purpose and maybe, exploring outer space once more and having an object to go explore and study and new frontiers seems kind of amazing.
I mean, listen, nothing gets Americans more excited than NASA and space and other worlds. And I certainly get sort of the energy around this kind of moment. We think about when people landed on the moon and sort of just this age of entering in a new era of exploration and a new era of the sky is literally no longer the limit, that there are galaxies that people can sort of ascertain in ways that didn't ever feel possible. So it is exciting, although I will admit, I was expecting Martians and photographs. And
you wanted him to be and underneath this sheet is, yes! Waves. So look, I mean, obviously we need to talk about what this discovery actually was to understand the kind of spin. But on that front, I mean, I read something, I think it was at the time, pointing out that summer was the summer that the movie Independence Day had come out.
Oh my gosh.
And then I don't know if you remember that also there was that movie called Mars Attacks, which I actually remember really thinking was quite funny. But so I don't think it's a coincidence or it's in the air that Americans were fascinated by this idea. And so I think Clinton maybe it was on his mind. I think the sort of particular political pressures is even more important. And I'm struck by, in his remarks, Clinton, he doesn't get super wonky. I think he actually has a technical guy come up and sort of describe the technical findings. And then he comes on and kind of plays it up. But even in that, when you read his remarks from the Rose Garden that day, I mean, he talks about, in one moment he says, this discovery must be confirmed by other scientists, but clearly the fact that something of this magnitude is being explored is another vindication of America's space program and our continuing support for it, even in these tough financial times. And I just hear in that last little phrase both kind of a political fight he's probably fighting, that's a coded message to whoever's obstructing his funding proposals, but also a kind of like, hey, America, like, things might be tough, I know, but look at this. Like, isn't this cool? Like, despite the fact that the economy is struggling,
we shouldn't cut back on
right.
STEM.
We shouldn't cut back on STEM. And like, I did something good. Look at me.
I'm about to bargain away your Social Security and your Medicare, but Martians.
Yeah. So I think that's some of the kind of like cultural, political context. I suppose we should talk about the rock itself and what was actually found. And that, of course, plays against the notion of, I think, let's make the spectrum of the way America reacted to this. One side is on Kellie's side, which is, we're the little green men, what the hell? And then on the other side is kind of like, oh, cool, like, this is a real interesting scientific discovery about the possibility of life on Mars. And I think a lot of people probably didn't understand what was actually being portrayed here and was actually the scientific discovery here. So one of you want to take a crack at telling us about this rock, ALH 84001. It did come from Mars, but it took a stop in between, right?
Listen, this rock is about 4 billion years old. I can't get my mind around that. But basically, it was a meteor or a part of Mars that broke off and was like ejected about maybe 3.6 billion years ago and landed, like crash landed into Earth right around Antarctica about 13,000 years ago. So when they find this particular rock in 1984, like some meteorite hunters find this rock and realize that, whoa, this rock has like all of the properties of Mars, that this rock is actually not of this Earth. And so that's what starts sort of like this rock becoming one of the most studied rocks in world history. Like all of the experiments that they start to conduct on this rock.
I feel like it goes Rosetta Stone and then this rock.
Yeah, I know, right? It's what leads them to make this, conclusion that there would be biogenic activity on Mars.
Yeah.
And the important thing here is that these are meteorite hunters. So when they first find this rock, they assume that it is part of what was once a meteorite that had crashed down into Earth. They didn't know that it had these Martian origins. And so they kind of stick it on a shelf and it hangs out for a while.
Totally. Well,
then scientists, go ahead.
No, well, I mean, a while meaning, 12 years? I mean, compared to 3.6 billion, that's nothing. But I do like that it still has to sit around. Once it makes its long journey to Earth, it still has to sit on a shelf for 12 years before someone really kind of
It had come so far for such a long time, and then it just sits on a shelf. But then scientists begin to study it a little bit more, and they realize that it has these properties that make it clear that it wasn't a meteor, that it had actually come from Mars, and that it also had these properties of some sort of carbon life form. And now here, of course, we're not talking about like Marvin the Martian. We're not talking about the aliens from Independence Day. It's bacterial almost, right? It's tiny. It's still really, really, really important because we're still at that point where we have not yet found evidence that there is life outside of the planet Earth that we can recognize. And so even if it is this teeny tiny little microbe, even if it's like a little bit of algae, it would fundamentally change what we know about the universe. The known universe is now a universe that has life outside of our planet. And so if that's what happened, if that's the discovery, it is one of the most significant it is one of the most significant astronomical discoveries in human history.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting the world together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
to give Clinton credit, the sort of navigating of how the scientific process works versus how the sort of public imagination works. And, whenever we've touched on episodes, I feel like that are about that, that's often so at the heart of it, right? I think in large part, I'm sort of impressed that Clinton does a defense of the scientific process, right? That all of these things are incremental and all of these things just sort of slightly change our thinking. While at the same time, I think, to your point, Niki, like, it might be that, like, at some point a threshold is crossed, right? It's not like, oh, we found Martians, but, like, there was, like, the world in which there was zero evidence, and now there is some evidence. And maybe that is the Rubicon. Maybe that is the switch that gets flipped, and maybe that is worth sort of playing up in a really, really big way. And that is, by all indications, we'll talk about kind of how this has evolved, but by all indications, in that moment, that's what the scientific consensus was saying. Like, look, we just crossed. Like, we just took one little small incremental step forward, but it was across a pretty significant line.
A giant giant leap for mankind.
Yeah. No, I think about this with the Mars rover that is doing work in Mars right now, and how they believe they found, like, pockets of water or ice, I believe it is, that they found, and how game-changing that was, like, to not just think about organisms, but to think about water as a compound that might exist on Mars, was also something that people were sort of losing their minds over a little bit in a really exciting way. But I think all of these different elements just give us more possibility to think about what could be. And all of, like, the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns, like, all of those things.
Well, and I think that water example is a really important one, because the level of excitement that accompanied that. That was excitement over the sign that a precondition for life as we know it might exist. So here's this moment where we're like, no, actually, we found the life itself, which is pretty amazing.
Right. And, or, indication of activity of life. We won't get into that.
We have to start scaling it back now.
We have to start catching.
I know.
Obviously, there's a lot you can go and read about this that would get very wonky. I also will say there's a really great Texas Monthly piece written, I think it was in 96, or sort of in the immediate aftermath of this, but it sort of profiles the main scientists behind this and kind of talks about how this all came together and all the various scientists and agencies that kept looking at this rock and then reached this moment where they decided to, sort of poke their head up and say, look, there's some very interesting things going on with this rock. Now, to reiterate, like, how the scientific process works, right? You don't just, like, find something and then wipe your hands and walk away. People continue to ask questions and look into it and so forth. And so, all of us, and I think that largely speaking the public, sort of saw this moment that Clinton walks out of the Rose Garden and says this thing, but scientists keep poking and prodding at this rock. So I suppose as we wrap up, we should talk about kind of where do we stand now? What more have we learned about this rock? Does it change how we evaluate what Clinton said in that moment?
I mean, the most important headline here is that more studies revealed that any sort of organic matter or sign of organic matter did not come from Mars, that there wasn't actually evidence in the rock that there was life on Mars. And that was the big kind of letdown moment of this, right? I feel like we've told some space stories recently that have kind of, this could be amazing. And then at the end, it's like, well, maybe not. And that is at least part of this. That's the big headline here, is that there wasn't evidence of life on that rock.
But still, the rock still exists. I mean, the rock is still something that is not of this earth that landed. And whether or not we can sort of determine how to make meaning of that, it's still not nothing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, like. Well,
and so on that, sort of two fronts. One, on this rock itself, specifically, which, by the way, we should say that name that it has, ALH 84001, that 84 is the year it was discovered. It was the first rock they picked up in 1984, sat on a shelf until 96, et cetera, et cetera. But in the years since, some Japanese biologists in recent years have found, to your point, Kellie, not evidence of life, but trace evidence on there that indicates that Mars had water at one point, which of course is the other big thing. So, I think that rock is still sort of giving us clues and information. But the other legacy here, and I think if you talk to most scientists, this really did make a mark and did kind of reinvigorate this field of astrometeorology, astrobiology. And so whether, it actually provided answers or not, it kind of provided questions that then lots of people were starting to investigate and kind of reinvigorate this field. So it served its purpose in that way, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I think that part of the resurgence and interest in the space program, going to Mars, some of the evidence of water has been a big part of that, but wanting to send manned missions there, I think this all has been an extension of the focus on Mars that comes from this moment. And there has been a resurgence, not just in astrobiology and some of those scientific fields, but I do think that there's a kind of imaginative spark that it helps to feed. Just like Star Trek The Next Generation helped to feed it in the 1990s. Some of the movies that you mentioned, a lot of them...
Matt Damon's The Martian.
Yeah, exactly. And some of them are about space as a threat. A lot of that coming in the post-Cold War moment where now aliens are the big danger as opposed to Soviets. But part of that, but a lot of it was this idea of exploration and that there was life to find out there. And I think that does continue to fuel a lot of Americans' interest, and you need moments like this. Right now, Congress is having hearings on UFOs. All of this feeds into continued support for programs like NASA and SETI and those kinds of things.
Listen, I believe it and I support it. I believe that there's life out there. I support research that's out there. I just think I'm ready to see more of this whenever, they find the next big thing. Yeah. I'm here for it. Even if it's just a rock that falls from wherever, I'm here for it.
One last thing, actually, Niki, just because you mentioned it, you talked about the kind of how going to Mars came into this public imagination, this new era of, it's what I don't think of any of our last few presidents as kind of having that as a signature thing necessarily, in the way certainly that Kennedy had going to the moon. But I don't know, this era a lot better, where was Clinton trying to kind of make a resurgent space exploration part of his thing? Was it Newt Gingrich who was obsessed with going to Mars?
Newt Gingrich was absolutely obsessed, not necessarily with going to Mars. I mean, his big thing has been building a colony on the moon.
Oh, yeah,
but
that's right.
He's super, super interested in science, in museums, in astronomy. And so it's interesting, at this very moment in time that this is all happening, Gingrich and Clinton are making plans on how to gut federal programs in so many different ways. But they share this belief in scientific research and scientific endeavors.
So maybe that's what that line was about in that speech. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I think that it was common ground, and Clinton, for better or worse, was always trying to find common ground with Gingrich. And I think this is one of those moments. It would be interesting to look into and see what kinds of conversations they were having about it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I will quote Clinton as we go one last time. In that remark, he says, "Today, Rock 84001 speaks to us across all those billions of years and millions of miles. It speaks of the possibility of life." So, those are nice words. At the very least, it speaks to us on this podcast. We get to speak about it. So, you got that out of it. No, this has been really interesting.
84001 speaks through us.
Exactly. And any astrobiologists out there, write in and tell us how we botched all of this information. We will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
In 1984, an American scientist on an annual U.S. government mission to search for meteors on Antarctica picked it up and took it to be studied. Appropriately, it was the first rock to be picked up that year, rock number 84001. Today, rock 84001 speaks to us across all those billions of years and millions of miles. It speaks of the possibility of life. If this discovery is confirmed, it will surely be one of the most stunning insights into our universe that science has ever uncovered. Its implications are as far-reaching and awe-inspiring as can be imagined.